discussing the clothing of an adult Roman citizen.
I'm Benjamin Tannenbaum10.
And I'm Ryan Getty. So I'm an adult Roman citizen just for this presentation, and I wear a toga, a tunic, and I wear calceus or sola, and I also wear a signet ring, which is for marking documents, like Eliza said. Next slide. Here's the tunic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Alright, so the tunic was the most basic article of clothing for anyone in Rome. Slaves, and obviously the regular citizen, all had one. For the regular citizens, it was generally worn underneath the toga borealis, which we'll discuss later on. It was considered more of an undershirt, but oftentimes citizens would they'd sometimes just go out with only this on and not their toga, because it was generally obviously more comfortable. But it was, like I said, generally it was considered more of an undershirt. In earlier times, it often was short sleeved, as you can see here, and generally it just extended to about the waist, but then as time went on, it then had longer sleeves and then could extend as low as the feet. Alright, so this is the subligaculum, or Roman underwear. Alright. Generally, it was just a one-piece article of clothing, just like a loincloth, and it would be wrapped around the waist, and it would generally just be worn underneath both the tunic and the toga borealis. Alright, this is the toga borealis and how it was generally put on. It was, obviously, as you can see, it was really long. It was generally made of wool and was left just the basic color for the Roman citizen. Since the basic Roman citizen, as you've heard before, generally they had slaves to help them out, but sometimes they didn't, so obviously it was a bit more uncomfortable. Earlier on, it was a bit uncertain how long the toga should be, but then as time went on, they then came up with standards, as you can see there, 6 yards, and how it should be put on. A lot of times, it wasn't required to be out for just basic everyday activity, but then during events, it was required, which is kind of ironic because then lower classes were not allowed at all to wear a toga whatsoever, but then the Roman citizen, they had to wear it. And some of them, they were okay with wearing it, but as was said before, it could really hinder your activity. So generally, they just went out without it unless they had to.
And as Eliza said, the more basic it was, the lower wealth that they had.
Alright, this is the signet ring. Now, generally it was a bit uncertain as to whether the average Roman citizen would have a signet ring, but what often happened was the wealthier class would have it, and as far as jewelry went during this time, this was probably the only amount of jewelry you'd see on any average Roman citizen, but like I said, it was generally for the more wealthy. And it was used for signing documents. You would put wax on a letter or envelope and just put your ring on. It would have your official mark. So generally you'd see a lot more like official type people wearing one of these.
It was a rule that you could supposedly only wear that, but it was often broken, and the wealthier ones usually wore more than one piece of jewelry.
Alright, so this is the calceus. It was made of leather. It was one of the more common form of shoes that you'd see. It was made of one piece, and as you can see, it would be strapped on top and didn't fully cover the foot, but enough that it would be comfortable. Alright, and then, so as you can see at the bottom are the soleae. These were often the more basic sandal that you would see Romans wearing, and that's the picture that we have there. It would be laced across the foot. Sometimes, they were generally made of leather, but they could also be made of wood sometimes. The bottom part would be, but then they'd be laced with leather on top. Sometimes, as you can see, it starts to extend a bit up the calf, but it's generally pretty low cut. It's also the name for a fish, which made looking up pictures very difficult for this. And we also have the crepide, which was it generally covered most of the foot, save for the very top, which was held together by leather straps, which also acted as laces for that and most of the other shoes. And the gallicae was the form of boot that Romans would wear, and it was basically the only kind of boot that the most basic Roman would wear, because generally boots were saved for hunters or for military purposes. The gallicae, it's pretty interesting because it was invented shortly after the Roman conquests in Gaul, and it's pretty much an example of how Romans would borrow from the culture that they would encounter, and they actually named it after Gaul, Gallicae. So, interesting fact.